It is overtime here again at Old Favorite Friday, and I'm joined by a very, very special guest this week, my partner in crime, one of the partners here at the brewery, Mr. Bill McPhee. Bill, you got this beer through kind of an interesting, fortuitous kind of practice, I guess you would say. This beer showed up at our brewery because someone knew you loved this beer.
That's true.
Right? So,
Yes.
so you must be the perfect person to talk about this beer for Old Favorite Friday if the entire world knows how much you love this beer.
And I do love this beer. So we're here to talk about Rodenbach Grand Cru.
So, Rodenbach Grand Cru is a Flanders-style red ale. It is a sour ale, right? Unfortunately, when we talk about sour ales these days, most people think we're talking about smoothie sours. They think we're talking about overly fruited, mostly sweet kind of beers that are hazy. They've got stuff floating around it all the time.
Right.
We are big fans here at Old Favorite Friday at Barrel Amongst of traditional sours, barrel-aged sours, wild yeast bacteria being used to create these flavors. So tell me a little bit about the Flanders style, because I think you're the go-to guy for that.
Yeah, so this beer is very interesting. It is the epitome of the Flanders red. And of course, Flanders being part of Belgium, and the Flanders red style is known as a sour beer, but the brewmaster, interestingly enough, he tends to not even like to use the word sour. He says it kind of scares people off a little bit, and I think sometimes it does.
Yeah.
But it's not full out sour as you taste it. It's got a sort of a sweet tart character to it, I think, which it's clearly a reddish brown beer, and I think so. It makes for a very interesting beer. It's the first sour beer actually I ever had. I could tell you a quick story on that. So years ago, and that would have been about 1990 or 1991, I had this beer for the first time in Amsterdam, and the guy I was learning about Belgian beers. I ended up going to Brussels after that, but the first time I had it was in Amsterdam, and the bartender, I was drinking several Belgians at that day, and he said, when he served it, I said, I want to try a Rodenbach Grand Cru, and he said, are you sure you want to have that? Like, it was really going to shock my taste buds, and it did a little bit. I mean, it was the first time I had it. I wasn't even completely sure I liked it, but I fell in love with it. I think it's a very unique style. The brewery itself is a fascinating place. I've visited the brewery several times. Had the pleasure of hanging out with Rudy Gekweier, I think is the way you pronounce his last name. But Rudy is a great guy, the brewmaster, and the brewery is a fascinating place. The way they make the beer, I think, is fascinating. Without going into too much technical detail, it's an interesting mix of high-tech and old-school low-tech processes. The brewing of the beer itself, the making of the initial part of the beer, is done on a super high-tech system. They actually use a mash filter, which you would know what it is, but it's the first time I'd ever seen a mash filter in use, a giant Mura. A mash filter, for those who don't know, is just one step of the process whereby you can extract the solids from the liquids as you're making the beer. And so it's a super high-tech front end, and then the back end, after they make the beer, they put it in these giant oak vats known as foeders, and they have 294 of them. I don't know why I remember that, but they have 294 of them. So it's a big cellar. Each one of them holds several thousand gallons. They're very large oak vats, and they maintain those there. They have this huge cellar, and they maintain them. They have their own coopers there that actually, ever so often, a foeder is scheduled for deconstruction and reconstruction. They take it fully apart, they scrape the inside of the wood and reculture it again. The culture, the bacteria, the natural bacteria that develop in that are what give it this tart flavor. And I just think that's fascinating, the old school versus new school processes. So.
Well, the process here of making this beer is it's much tougher. It's a longer process, it's more detailed process. There's more that goes into making a beer like this than there is to go to a lot of the more modern American sours. I mean, by a long shot.
Absolutely. What's this? So this beer actually spends up to 2 years in those vats, and then they blend it back. They use old beer versus newer beer, and blend it together. There's, I think, 3 different versions of the Rodenbach General Beer. There's the Rodenbach Classic, the Rodenbach Grand Cru, and the Rodenbach Vintage. And the Vintage is straight 100% old beer, like 2-year-old vat matured beer. And then the Grand Cru, I believe, is 1/3, 2/3 new beer versus old barrel aged beer. But,
So we have also featured. We featured one other Flanders red before on Old Favorite Friday. It was Duchess de Bourgogne, which was lovely. We could not. I wanted to do this beer. It was one of the first beers we ever did for Old Favorite Friday, but it wasn't available.
Correct.
We did not have it in our current market here in Florida. Now it is coming back into the market. It's one of the reasons why we were able to get our hands on it. I want to talk a little bit about the flavor, because you mentioned kind of a sweet tart kind of thing going on. Super complex, but what are the other things that you taste in this beer?
That's a good question. I would describe it as there's a little bit of a dark fruit character that comes through on it. Clearly, you get some of the oak flavors from the barrel, but mostly, like I say, it's a subtle. There's a slight malt sweetness balanced by this just gentle tartness. Unlike a lot of quote sour beers, there's not a lot of that harsh back of your throat acidity.
It's a soft. It's kind of a softness,
softness,
a suppleness on the sour.
Yeah, it is. It is,
which is really nice. I pick up like strawberry on the nose.
That's
something
interesting, yeah.
I've always picked up, and definitely some caramel malts in there
Yeah.
from the color that you're going to get in. For most beers, you're going to see that of this color. It is really complex. I think some people are challenged by sour because they're not expecting it, right? Even though they're becoming more popular in a different form. The other thing that I'm interested in, we talk about food and beer pairings a lot. What do you have a food that you would pair with this, Bill, or is that up?
I think this would be balanced well with something fairly rich. I know I have had it with steak and beef dishes, so rich, meaty dishes I think would go well with this. What do you think?
You know, I just tasting it, and there are some rules to beer pairings, just like there are with wine pairings, and there are some old standbys. I haven't really had to pair a lot of sours in my day, and I haven't read about it recently. I'd like something with blue cheese. I think that the richness and the fattiness and the big funky flavors would be really, really nicely balanced by the sourness and the tartness.
But that would be good.
That would really like kind of cut that in the palate. So whether or not that would be like a filet mignon with like blue cheese encrusted filet mignon with like a demi-glace, I think that would be just dynamite. This is a really, really great beer. I'm thrilled that it's back in the market. Also, my brother-in-law has been talking about this beer and the fact that he wanted to do Old Favorite Friday and wanted to get his hands on this forever. So I'm going to steal a bottle from you, Bill, if you don't mind.
All right.
Brad
you
will
may certainly do so.
Brad will have a bottle for himself. We'll be really excited about it. Is there anything else you want to share about Rodenbach, about sours, about anything about the style, anything at all?
No, I just think people need to keep an open mind about it and not think of sours as one general class of beers. It's a broad spectrum from highly acidic, fairly stark in flavor to subtle tartness, which is very wine-like. You know, and I think that's one of the things that I would call this beer is it's very wine-like. You know, wine has a good deal of acidity in it, and people don't think of wine as being sour, but I think some of that comes through on this beer.
You hit the nail on the head. I know people that drink the most sour, tart Sauvignon Blanc,
right,
and will tell me that they don't like sour things,
right.
But there are New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs that are straight up tart, right? And this doesn't even have that much tartness to it. It is very wine-like. It is very complex. Really, really nice beer. I hope is talking about like keeping your open mind is that we've got all these kind of quickie sours, kind of one-dimensional sours, things of that nature that are out there in the market. I hope that those are a gateway into this. I hope that if you go and you try this, you know, whatever it is, some heavily fruited strawberry shortcake sour,
Right.
smoothie sour,
Right.
that you'll learn that you like some of those flavor profiles, and you'll get into a Rodenbach, you'll get into a Duchess, you'll go to Odd Breed, and you'll drink really, really well-made, wild fermented beers that are super complex and interesting, and you'll get a chance to kind of evolve the palate a little bit into something that is very classic and really, really complex. So that's my hope for that. Please, for all of you, if you have any comments about what we should be featuring on Old Favorite Friday in the future, please leave them here. Please also like, subscribe, notification bell, all the stuff you have to do on YouTube, and poke around and see more conversations that we have about other great beers every single week. And we'll see you next time on Old Favorite Friday. Cheers.
Cheers.